Most people believe children are shaped by love. They are not. They are shaped by imitation. And imitation is far more dangerous because a child does not become what you teach them. They become what you are. Watch a child for one afternoon, not what they say, not what they are told. Watch what they copy, and you will understand something deeply uncomfortable. Most parents are not raising human beings. They are reproducing themselves. Comment mirror if you see how children copy what they live, not what they're told. If you want to break the patterns you were raised in, subscribe. Because most people repeat their lives, few understand them, and even fewer escape them. The quiet copy, don't interfere, just observe. Sit quietly and watch a child for an hour, maybe two. Say nothing, correct nothing, guide nothing. Just pay attention in a way most people never do. Watch how the child holds a fork, not awkwardly, not randomly, not in some original way that belongs only to them, but precisely, like their father. The angle of the wrist, the pressure of the grip, even the small unconscious pauses between movements. Now watch their face, the way their eyes narrow when something bores them, that subtle, almost dismissive eye roll. Look closely. It is not new, it is not invented, it is inherited behavior, learned without a single word being spoken. Watch how they speak, the rhythm of their voice, the tone, the speed, the hesitation, especially the hesitation, that brief pause before they ask a question, that half second where something inside them stops and checks. They look toward the adult in the room, not for knowledge, not for guidance, but for permission. Permission to be curious, permission to think, permission to exist in a way that might not be approved. And in that moment, something important is revealed. You think you are watching a child learning about the world, but you are not. You are watching a child learning how far they are allowed to go, where the invisible boundaries are, what is safe to express and what must be hidden. You are not watching innocence, you are watching adaptation. You are watching a recording being formed in real time, a living echo of behaviors repeated so consistently that they no longer feel learned, they feel natural, obvious, correct. This is how imitation works, not loudly, not forcefully, but quietly, relentlessly. A child does not sit down and decide who to become. They absorb, they mirror, they internalize everything that surrounds them. Not just actions, but reactions. Not just words, but tones. Not just rules, but fears. A child enters the world almost like a philosopher. They ask why without embarrassment. They touch what they are told not to touch. They explore without asking for permission. They cry without apology. They laugh without restraint. They exist for a brief moment as something rare, unfiltered, uncorrected, completely themselves. But that moment does not last. It cannot last because the world does not reward raw authenticity. It shapes it, slowly, patiently, lovingly. The child is guided, adjusted, refined, corrected in small ways that seem harmless. Don't do that. Be quiet. That's not how we act. Say it like this. Sit properly. Behave. And none of it feels cruel. None of it feels destructive. In fact, it feels necessary. It feels like love. It feels like care. And that is precisely why it is so powerful, because what is being removed is not just bad behavior, it is unpredictability, it is individuality. It is the parts of the child that do not easily fit into the world they are being prepared for. Parents call this raising, teaching, guiding. But beneath those softer words there is a harder truth, something more uncomfortable, something rarely acknowledged. Because it challenges the very idea of what it means to be a good parent. A harsher word would describe it more accurately. Not raising, not guiding, but taming. And it happens so gradually, so gently, that by the time anyone notices, it already feels normal, permanent, and almost impossible to undo. Inherited stupidity. There is a kind of stupidity that never announces itself. It does not introduce itself as ignorance. It does not wear the face of foolishness. In fact, it often sounds reasonable, measured, even wise. It arrives quietly, wrapped in familiarity, in phrases you have heard your entire life, phrases that feel so normal you stop questioning them. That's just how life is. Be realistic. Don't think too much. You'll understand when you're older. These are not statements of truth. They are signals. Signals that thinking has stopped. That curiosity has reached a boundary it is not allowed to cross. This kind of stupidity is not loud. It does not argue. It does not need to, because it has already been accepted. It lives inside habits, inside tone, inside the way people react without noticing they are reacting. And most dangerously, it does not feel like stupidity. It feels like common sense, but it is not born. No child enters the world believing these things. No child naturally limits their own thinking. This is something learned, something absorbed slowly over time, passed down not through blood, but through behavior, through repetition, through the quiet observation of how adults respond to life. A child watches when a parent gives up, when they say, "That's just the way things are." The child does not analyze it, they record it. A child hears when curiosity is dismissed, when questions are met with irritation instead of engagement. They do not argue, they adjust, and over time, what was once open begins to close. This is how inheritance works. Not through instruction, but through imitation. Most people do not sit down and choose their beliefs. They inherit them, they absorb them from the environment around them, from parents, from teachers, from the silent expectations of society. Most people do not think, they repeat. They repeat phrases they never questioned. They repeat opinions they never formed. They repeat patterns they never chose. And because everyone around them is doing the same thing, it feels normal, it feels correct, it feels safe. But safety has a cost, because when you stop thinking, you also stop choosing. And when you stop choosing, your life begins to follow a script written long before you were born, handed down from one generation to the next. No one remembers where it started, no one questions why it continues, but everyone plays their role. Say the right things, want the right things, fear the right things, and call it life. The individual who tries to step outside this script immediately feels the pressure. Not always openly, not always aggressively, but constantly. They are seen as different, difficult, unnecessary. They begin to feel it internally. Doubt, isolation, a quiet sense that something is wrong, not with the world, but with them. Loneliness becomes familiar. Confusion becomes constant. Even fear begins to settle in, because to think independently is to separate yourself from the comfort of agreement, and most people are not willing to pay that price. But there is something worse than loneliness, worse than confusion, worse than fear, and that is the quiet tragedy of a life never examined. A life lived entirely through inherited patterns, a life where every belief, every decision, every desire was shaped by something external and never truly questioned, because the greatest loss is not failure, it is not rejection, it is not even suffering. The greatest loss is never discovering who you might have been if you had thought for yourself, because the price of stepping outside the script is heavy. But the price of staying inside it is everything, your identity, your freedom, your life. And most people pay that price without ever realizing they had a choice. The herd. The problem is not ignorance. Ignorance can be corrected, it can be challenged, it can be replaced with understanding. The real problem is far more subtle, far more difficult to escape. The problem is conformity, because a person who does not know can still learn. But a person who has stopped questioning has already decided humans do not need to be forced into obedience. They are guided into it, softly, gradually, almost invisibly, not through threats, not through punishment, but through something far more powerful than fear, belonging. The need to belong is not weakness, it is deeply human. It is one of the oldest instincts we carry, to be accepted, to be included, to not be alone. And because of this, control becomes effortless. The herd does not need to push you, it simply rewards you. Move with the group and you feel safe. You feel validated. You feel like everything is as it should be. Your thoughts are echoed. Your behavior is approved. Your identity is reinforced. There is comfort in agreement, a quiet sense that you are on the right path simply because others are walking beside you. But the moment you stop, the moment you question, everything changes. You feel it immediately, not as punishment, but as distance, a shift in tone, a subtle withdrawal. The same people who once agreed with you become quiet, uncertain, even dismissive. And suddenly, you are alone, not physically, but psychologically. And that kind of isolation is difficult to endure. So what happens to the child who asks too many questions? The child who does not accept easy answers? They are not seen as thoughtful. They are labeled difficult, stubborn, problematic. And what happens to the child who feels too deeply, who reacts more intensely than expected, who refuses to hide their emotions? They are not understood, they are corrected. You're too sensitive, you need to toughen up, you're too much. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the child begins to adjust. Not because they are weak, not because they lack intelligence, but because exclusion feels unbearable, because the cost of being different feels heavier than the cost of changing. So they soften their questions, they reduce their curiosity, they hide their intensity, they learn when to speak and when to stay silent. They learn what is acceptable and what is not. And over time, this adjustment becomes identity. It no longer feels like compromise. It feels like who they are. Parents do not do this with cruelty. They do not wake up intending to erase individuality. They do it out of love, out of fear, out of a desire to protect their child from a world they themselves struggled to navigate. They see danger everywhere, rejection, failure, isolation, and they want their child to avoid it, to be safe, to be accepted, to belong. But protection has a hidden cost, because in trying to make the child safe, they make the child predictable. In trying to make them accepted, they make them dependent on approval. In trying to protect them from discomfort, they remove the very experiences that create strength. And what is left is not a person who can stand alone, not a person who can think freely, but something far more manageable, far more common, someone who fits, someone who adapts, someone who knows exactly how to move within the expectations of others. This is what the herd produces, not monsters, not failures, but something quieter, something easier to overlook. People who are acceptable, not exceptional, not independent, not truly free, just acceptable. And in a world that rewards conformity, that is often enough. But it comes at a cost most people never fully see, because the price of belonging without question is the slow disappearance of the self. And once that disappears, it is very difficult to get it back. What parents really teach. Most parents believe they are teaching their children how to succeed, how to survive, how to build a good life. And on the surface, that is exactly what it looks like. Advice is given, rules are explained, guidance is offered. But beneath all of this, something else is being taught, something quieter, something far more influential. In reality, most parents are not teaching their children how to succeed. They are teaching them how to conform. Not deliberately, not maliciously, but consistently. They teach obedience, not the kind that comes from understanding, not the kind that grows from trust or reasoning, but the reflexive kind, the automatic kind. Authority speaks and you comply. No hesitation, no questioning, no resistance. Sit down, be quiet, do as you're told. And for a child, this seems reasonable, even necessary. But the lesson does not stay small. It expands, it settles deeper, until it becomes instinct. And the child learns something dangerous, something that follows them into adulthood. Stop thinking, follow the voice. It does not matter whose voice it is. A teacher, a boss, a tradition, a majority opinion. The pattern is the same. Authority appears and thought disappears. Then they teach fear of failure, but they do not call it fear. They call it ambition. They call it discipline. They call it wanting the best for their child. So the focus becomes clear. Grades, achievements, recognition, respectable careers, paths that are already approved, already validated, already safe. And again, this seems reasonable, it seems responsible, but underneath it, a message is forming. Quietly, powerfully, if you succeed, you are worthy. If you fail, you are not. And the child absorbs this without question. They begin to measure themselves, not by curiosity, not by growth, but by performance. And slowly, their sense of self becomes conditional, dependent, fragile. I am valuable only if I perform. Then comes emotional control, or what is called control. Don't cry, don't overreact. Be strong, don't be too sensitive, don't be too different. And the intention is not cruelty, it is comfort. Parents want their child to be accepted, to not be rejected, to not stand out in ways that might bring pain. So they smooth the edges, they quiet the intensity, they reduce the extremes, and the child learns something subtle but lasting. Not all feelings are acceptable, not all expressions are safe, so they begin to hide. Not just from others, but from themselves. They create a surface, a version that fits, a version that is easier to understand, easier to accept, easier to approve, and everything else, everything deeper, is pushed underneath, unseen, unspoken, unresolved. And finally, they teach the most dangerous idea of all, not directly, not explicitly, but through example, through agreement, through the constant reinforcement of what is normal. They teach that the group is right, that consensus is truth, that if enough people believe something, it must be real. And this lesson goes unquestioned because it feels safe, it feels stable, it feels like certainty, but it creates something fragile, a person who cannot stand alone, a person who looks outward before thinking inward, a person who waits for agreement before forming a belief. And so when the moment comes, when truth stands on one side and the crowd stands on the other, the choice has already been made. Not consciously, not deliberately, but automatically. The child who has learned this will follow the group, even when the group is wrong, even when something inside them disagrees, even when the cost of agreement is the loss of their own voice, because standing alone was never practiced. It was never encouraged. It was never allowed to become safe. And so they do what they were trained to do. They adapt, they agree, they belong. And in doing so, they lose the very thing that would have made them strong. The ability to think independently, the ability to question, the ability to stand alone and still remain certain. The mirror problem. Here is the truth no one wants to face. Not because it is complicated, not because it is difficult to understand, but because it is deeply uncomfortable. Parents do not raise children, they raise mirrors. Not perfect reflections, not identical copies, but patterns, echoes, traces of themselves that continue forward in another form. The parent who feared rejection does not simply remember that fear, they carry it, quietly, constantly, and without realizing it, they pass it on. They raise a child who watches every reaction, who measures every word, who learns early that approval is something to be earned, not something freely given. And so the child becomes careful, polite, acceptable. But beneath that, there is something else, a constant tension, a quiet need to be validated, a fear of stepping outside what is allowed. The parent who failed does not just move on from failure. They interpret it, they define it, they build beliefs around it. This is dangerous. This is not worth trying. This is how people get hurt. And the child absorbs those beliefs, not as stories, but as rules, unquestioned, unchallenged, and so they hesitate. They avoid risk. They choose safety over possibility. not because they lack courage, but because fear has already been introduced as wisdom. The parent who suppressed emotion, who learned early that feeling too much was a problem, passes down something even more subtle: disconnection. They do not teach it directly, they model it. They show the child how to hide, how to minimize, how to keep certain parts of themselves out of sight, and the child learns. They learn that emotions are not to be trusted, that vulnerability is weakness, that expression leads to discomfort. So they adapt, they disconnect, they lose access to parts of themselves before they even understand what they are losing. We call all of this guidance. We call it protection. We call it doing what is best. But at a deeper level, it is something else entirely. It is projection. The parent does not just see the child. They see themselves, their past, their fears, their unresolved experiences, and without meaning to, they try to prepare the child for a world they themselves never fully understood. They pass down strategies, defenses, limitations, not because they are correct, but because they are familiar. Parents do not just pass down knowledge, they pass down wounds, wounds that were never examined, never questioned, never healed. And time does not transform wounds into wisdom. Time only makes them easier to ignore, more comfortable to live with, more invisible. But invisibility does not remove their influence, it deepens it, because what is unseen is rarely challenged. A child does not inherit your strength. Strength must be built, tested, chosen. What a child inherits is the shape of your limitations, the edges of your fear, the boundaries you never crossed, the questions you never asked, the parts of life you quietly avoided, and those limitations become their starting point, their normal, their definition of what is possible. Unless something interrupts the pattern, it continues, unnoticed, unquestioned, unbroken. And the tragedy is not that parents are flawed. Flaws are human. They are unavoidable. The tragedy is that most of those flaws are never examined, never brought into awareness, never challenged before they are passed on. So the cycle repeats. Generation after generation, not through intention, but through imitation, not through cruelty, but through unconscious repetition. And what is created is not a new person, not something entirely original, but a variation, a continuation, a reflection that feels independent, but is deeply shaped by what came before. A mirror, and like all mirrors, it does not choose what it reflects. It simply shows what is placed in front of it, until one day someone notices and decides to become something else, the one who escapes. But sometimes, rarely, a child resists, not perfectly, not easily, but persistently. Something in them refuses to disappear. They keep questioning, even when it becomes uncomfortable. They keep noticing, even when it isolates them. They feel the pressure to conform, but do not fully submit. This is not rebellion for attention. This is something deeper, the ability to shape oneself, to choose rather than inherit, to endure being misunderstood without collapsing. This person is not created through comfort. They are forged through friction, through doubt, through failure, through standing alone and surviving it. What strong parenting really is. Real strength in parenting is not protection, it is preparation. It means allowing the child to fail, not to punish them, but to teach them something critical. Failure ends. It is survivable. It means taking their questions seriously, even when you don't have answers. Especially when you don't have answers. It means allowing disagreement, even when it challenges you, because truth matters more than authority. It means teaching discomfort, not avoiding it, because discomfort is not danger, it is growth beginning. And above all, it means raising a person, not a reflection of yourself. What you pass to your child is not your advice. It is your example, your habits, your fears, your courage, or your lack of it. A parent who never questions anything raises a child who never will. A parent who never stands alone raises a child who cannot. And the result is a world full of people who say the right things, follow the right paths, live the right lives, and feel something quietly missing. Not pain, not failure, something worse. Absence, the absence of a self that was never allowed to fully exist. So the question is not, do you love your child? Of course you do. The real question is your love strong enough to let them become someone you did not plan? Because the rare child, the one who becomes something real, was not protected from chaos. They were taught how to stand inside it and not disappear.